There's a black kid trying to steal from my store. That's what Linda Powers, the white boutique manager, told the police. Her voice cold. Her eyes locked on 4-year-old Brianna Carter, who was simply trying to buy a birthday dress for her mother. Brianna had saved every penny from her allowance negative $450 to surprise her mom with something beautiful. But the moment she stepped into Golden Grace Boutique, everything changed. Linda didn't see a customer. She saw a threat. No warm greeting, no assistance, just silent suspicion. While white teenagers were treated like royalty, Brianna was followed, questioned, and eventually accused. When she pulled out her hard-earned cash, Linda called the police, anyway, claiming Brianna was stealing. And within minutes, a girl raised with respect and kindness found herself in handcuffs, humiliated, scared, and alone. What Linda didn't know, Brianna's mother, Danielle Carter, wasn't just any mom. She was the founder and CEO of Carter Luxe Group, a multi-million-dollar fashion empire, and the actual owner of the boutique. As soon as Danielle received her daughter's desperate text, everything stopped. She left a $50 million board meeting mid-sentence, mobilized her legal team, and raced across the city. What unfolded next wasn't just about justice for Brianna. It became a national reckoning, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one yelling, it's the mother whose child you just tried to break. It was supposed to be a normal day, a sweet surprise from a loving daughter to her hardworking mother. But instead, it turned into a firestorm of injustice, humiliation, and a lesson the world would never forget. 14-year-old Brianna Carter had been saving for months. Every dollar she tucked away, from allowance, tutoring neighborhood kids, and doing chores, had a single purpose: to buy the perfect dress for her mother's 40th birthday. Danielle Carter, her mom, wasn't just her hero. She was a symbol of strength. A single mother who had built a life from the ground up. Danielle was now the CEO of Carter Luxe Group, a fashion empire she created from nothing. But Brianna didn't want to use her mom's money. She wanted to do this herself. She found the dress online. Emerald green. Elegant. $400. Brianna had saved $450. And finally, worked up the courage to visit Golden Grace Boutique, the store that carried the dress. She had no idea the place was about to become the center of a scandal that would rock an entire industry. The boutique manager, Linda Powers, had worked at Golden Grace for 6 years. She saw herself as the guardian of its elite image. When Brianna walked in alone, young, and black, Linda didn't see a devoted daughter. She saw a problem. Without greeting her, Linda tracked Brianna's every move. When Brianna politely asked for help, Linda coldly pointed toward the back of the store. "Dresses are over there," she muttered, never making eye contact. Brianna, raised to be respectful and resilient, tried not to let it get to her. She examined dresses carefully, touched fabrics gently, and treated every item with care. But Linda followed, and her anyway, hovering with disapproving eyes. When Brianna finally picked up the emerald green dress, Linda stormed over. "Be careful with that. It's not a toy," she snapped. Brianna calmly replied, "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to check the price. It's $400. You obviously can't afford it." Brianna, without hesitation, pulled out her money negative $450 in neatly folded bills. "I've been saving for months. I want to buy this for my mom." Linda's expression twisted from shock to anger. "Where did you get this money?" "No kid. Your age has that kind of cash unless something shady is going on." Brianna, stunned, tried to explain. "It's mine. I saved it. I can show you the envelope or call my mom if you'd like." "No," Linda barked. "I think you came here to steal. You've been acting suspicious. I saw you put something in your jacket pocket." That was a lie, a complete fabrication. But before Brianna could respond, Linda picked up the phone and called the police. Yes, I have a black female juvenile here attempting to steal. I need officers immediately. Brianna was in tears when the police arrived. Despite her pleas and offers to let them search her purse, she was handcuffed and placed in a squad car. Inside the store, another employee, Amy Rodriguez, had watched everything unfold. She had seen Linda treat Brianna with cruelty while showering white customers with kindness. She wanted to speak up, but fear held her tongue. What no one at Golden Grace knew was who Brianna's mother really was. Across town, Danielle Carter was leading the most critical board meeting of the quarter, negotiating a $50 million expansion of her fashion empire. When her assistant rushed in with news about Brianna's arrest, Danielle didn't hesitate. She stood up, silenced the room, and walked out. This meeting is over. My daughter is in police custody. If that's a problem, take it up with the board. Oh wait, that's me. On the way to the boutique, Danielle called her legal team, her brother Judge Malcolm Carter, a federal judge, and her best friend Dr. Angela White, a pediatric trauma specialist. She also called Chief Logan, the police chief she had helped support through community funding. Meanwhile, Brianna sat in the patrol car, sobbing. Officer James Turner, who had made the arrest, was starting to doubt the situation. Nothing about this girl matched the typical profile of a shoplifter. She was polite, articulate, terrified, but not guilty. That doubt turned into full-blown panic when Chief Logan called him directly. You arrested Danielle Carter's daughter? Are you out of your mind? Minutes later, Danielle arrived, heels clicking like thunder, presence undeniable. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She walked straight to the squad car and said with terrifying calm, "Take those handcuffs off my daughter. Now." Officer Turner obeyed immediately. Then came the reckoning. Danielle revealed who she was, owner of Golden Grace Boutique, Linda's boss, and the woman whose daughter had just been falsely accused and publicly humiliated. Amy stepped forward, finally finding the courage to speak. She had video evidence, phone recordings, and personal testimony that proved Brianna did nothing wrong. The security footage confirmed it all. No theft, no suspicious behavior, only a respectful child trying to shop. Linda Powers was fired on the spot. Danielle promised to press charges for filing a false report, but she didn't stop there. She launched a company-wide overhaul, mandatory anti-bias training, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and the creation of the Brianna Carter Foundation, a $10 million scholarship fund for children affected by racial injustice. Brianna, still shaken, asked one thing before they left. Can we still get the dress? Danielle smiled. Not only are we buying that dress, sweetheart, we're buying 3 more. What began as an act of love turned into a national movement. Brianna didn't just buy her mom a gift. She helped ignite change. And Linda Powers? She learned the hard way what happens when you try to humiliate the daughter of a woman who built an empire and refuses to let anyone tear it down. It was meant to be a simple act of respect, an opportunity for a young man to share something he loved. But what happened inside the Whitmore estate that night would become a viral reckoning no one expected. 17-year-old Dante Fields wasn't supposed to be there, not in the dining hall of one of Manhattan's most prestigious estates, surrounded by billionaires, CEOs, and politicians. He was only there because his mother, Carla Fields, had worked at the estate for years as a cleaning lady. A single mother who had raised Dante with discipline, books from the thrift store, and a fierce belief that knowledge was power. That night, Victoria Whitmore, the arrogant daughter of real estate mogul Charles Whitmore, was hosting a charity gala with Manhattan's elite. All elegance, white roses, and ego. Somewhere between the speeches and the $1,000 bottles of wine, Victoria, draped in diamonds, decided to turn the evening into a spectacle. Her target, Dante. With a smug smile and condescending tone, she turned to the teen clearing empty plates and said, "You there. I hear you like chess. Why don't you show us what you've got? Let's play." It was meant to humiliate him. The guests chuckled. A few even pulled out their phones. In Victoria's mind, she was challenging a poor janitor's kid to entertain the wealthy, expecting him to fumble, to freeze, to prove that intellect belonged only to those with legacy and wealth. Dante, dressed in his neatly pressed Goodwill shirt, simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am." What no one at that table knew was that Dante Fields had been studying chess since he was 9. He had no formal coach, no expensive board, just a second-hand book on Bobby Fischer, a broken laptop he fixed himself, and an old chess app he used after school. Every night, after his mom fell asleep from exhaustion, Dante would study grandmaster strategies and replicate famous matches using bottle caps and cereal boxes as pieces. They set up the board. Victoria sat like royalty. Dante took his seat with quiet grace. The room grew still, some expecting a joke. What they got instead was genius. Victoria opened with a flashy queen's gambit designed to overwhelm beginners. Dante smiled gently and countered with a Sicilian defense, but with a twist. 5 moves in. Victoria looked confused. 10 moves in, her brow furrowed. 15 moves later, she was sweating. Dante wasn't just keeping up. He was controlling the board. By move 23, Victoria made a critical mistake. By move 29, she realized she'd been lured into a trap. And by move 31, Dante spoke calmly. "Checkmate." Silence fell across the entire room. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the applause, but not from Victoria's circle. It came from Congresswoman Lillian Mills, seated quietly at the edge of the room. A long-time advocate for educational reform and racial justice. Mills had watched the entire match unfold. She stood up slowly, walked toward Dante, and offered her hand. "Young man," she said with awe in her voice, "you just taught this room a lesson it will never forget." Victoria turned red with embarrassment, but she tried to play it off. It was just a game. No need to overreact, but Mills wasn't having it. "No, Victoria. You invited him to humiliate him. Instead, he humiliated arrogance." Word of the match spread fast. Within hours, video clips of Dante's victory flooded social media. The hashtag number checkmate with dignity trended for 2 days straight. News outlets called him the chess prodigy janitor's son. But to those who knew him, he was just Dante, a brilliant, humble teen who never let hardship define him. The next morning, offers poured in. Scholarships from Ivy League schools. Interviews with ESPN and CNN. The mayor's office called to invite Dante to City Hall for a formal recognition. But through it all, Dante remained grounded. "I didn't win because I'm smarter," he said in one interview. "I won because I studied, because my mom believed in me, because I refused to believe that dignity and brilliance belonged only to the wealthy." Carla Fields wept when she saw the news. She'd spent years cleaning floors for people who never saw her people like Victoria. But now, they had to see her son. 2 months later, Dante received a full scholarship to Stanford University. He began mentoring underprivileged students online, creating a free chess education program that reached thousands across the country. He named it the Fields Initiative, in honor of his mother. Victoria Whitmore, meanwhile, became the face of elite humiliation. Her private club rescinded her membership. Her sponsorships disappeared. Public opinion turned. No apology. From her ever came only silence. At a public event honoring Dante, Congresswoman Mills said, "He didn't just play chess that night. He changed the rules of the game. He reminded us that brilliance comes from everywhere, and that dignity can't be bought, but it can humble an empire." And so, Dante Fields, the janitor's son, didn't just win a match. he made a statement. He showed the world that greatness is forged not in privilege, but in perseverance. And that, sometimes, the most powerful move on the board is standing up for your worth without ever raising your voice. Because true genius isn't loud. It's undeniable. She stepped off the train with hope in her heart and a single suitcase in hand. Amara Wilson, a well-educated black woman from Boston, had arrived in Riverbrook with dreams of a new beginning. For months, she had exchanged letters with Harold Pierce, a white merchant, who'd placed an ad in a mail-order bride catalog. Their correspondence had been warm and sincere, or so she thought. Amara had left everything behind, believing she was coming to build a future. But what awaited her at the station was not love. It was humiliation. Harold took one look at her dark skin and turned his back. I didn't know you were colored, he sneered in front of the crowd. I won't marry you. The onlookers gasped. Amara stood tall, but the sting of rejection echoed louder than the train whistle that soon pulled away behind her. She said nothing. She didn't plead. She didn't beg. She simply picked up her bag and walked away with quiet dignity, while Harold chuckled and muttered something about not wanting trouble in town. What Harold didn't know, what no one in Riverbrook knew, was that Amara Wilson was no ordinary woman. Hours later, as she sat alone on a bench near the general store, unsure of where to go next, a kind voice spoke. Ma'am, do you need some help? It was Alexander Maxwell, a tall, soft-spoken white man in his early 42nd, known in town as a wealthy landowner and principled farmer. He'd seen everything at the station, and while others laughed or turned away, Alexander had been watching Amara's strength. It wasn't her silence that moved him. It was her pride. Amara hesitated but nodded. I don't need charity. Just a roof and a chance to earn my keep. You'll find no charity here, Alexander replied. Only opportunity. He offered her work on his estate as a temporary librarian and later as his estate manager. He provided her with a cottage and treated her not as a servant, but as an equal. Over the following months, Riverbrook whispered. Some townsfolk warned Alexander that he was making a mistake, that Amara didn't belong, but he paid them no mind. What they didn't understand was that Amara wasn't just intelligent, she was extraordinary. She had once been a school teacher, fluent in Latin and French, with a degree in history. But she carried a secret even greater than her intellect. She was the granddaughter of Joseph Freeman, a formerly enslaved man who had owned more than 200 acres of fertile Riverbrook land that mysteriously vanished after his death. Land now split among the founding white families of the town. While working in Alexander's estate library, Amara discovered something hidden behind an AGA, old ledger, a faded deed with Joseph Freeman's name, sealed with an official stamp. More documents followed, land transfer records, handwritten letters, a diary entry from the town's leavener, former mayor confessing to the illegal seizure of Joseph's estate. Amara wasn't just a visitor, she was the rightful heir to much of Riverbrook. Rather than seeking revenge, Amara made a bold choice. She gathered every piece of evidence and requested to speak at the next town hall. The same people who once mocked her now watched in silence as she walked to the front of the courthouse with her chin held high. My name is Amara Wilson, she began, and I carry the legacy of Joseph Freeman. The land many of you live on was stolen from my grandfather. Through lies, through fraud, and through silence. A murmur rippled through the room. I have the deeds, the confessions, the maps, she said, placing the documents on the table. But I am not here to reclaim what was stolen through force. I am here with a proposal. Gasps echoed. What was she planning? I proposed the creation of the Freeman Foundation, a trust dedicated to education, housing, and opportunity for every citizen of Riverbrook, regardless of race or status. I do not wish to punish the town. I wish to heal it. No one spoke for a full minute. Then, slowly, Alexander Maxwell stood and began to clap. One by one, others joined him, some with shame, others with gratitude. Harold Pierce, red-faced and bitter, stormed out. But the town was already changing. The Freeman Foundation was born within the month, funded initially by Amara's reclaimed land, and supported by donations from Alexander and other allies. It provided scholarships, housing, repairs, and even reopened the town's long-abandoned library under Amara's supervision. A year later, Amara and Alexander married, not in secrecy, but in front of the entire town. Their wedding became a symbol of what Riverbrook could become when dignity triumphed over division. Harold left town, his business bankrupt, his name forgotten. But Amara? She became a symbol of grace, justice, and transformation. She was invited to speak across the country about land rights, equity, and the power of legacy. Under her leadership, the Freeman Foundation grew into a national model, helping thousands of families research and reclaim stolen ancestral property. But she never left Riverbrook. Because for Amara Wilson, justice wasn't about destroying the past. It was about rebuilding a future that included everyone. And the most powerful revolution she ever led started with a broken heart, a train station, and the choice not to bow to hate. The marble floors of the Whitmore estate sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, and laughter echoed across the grand ballroom, laughter, not of joy, but of mockery. That night, Vanessa Brooks, the black cleaning lady most of the guests didn't even know by name, stepped into the room wearing a sapphire gown that shimmered like starlight. The whispers started. Instantly, the smirks followed. Charles Whitmore, the arrogant millionaire host, stood with a glass of champagne in hand, sneering from the top of the staircase. "Well, look who dared to show up," he muttered to his circle of elite guests, expecting them to laugh with him. And they did. Because, in their eyes, Vanessa was nothing more than the help, a woman who belonged behind the scenes, not beneath the ballroom lights. What none of them knew was that Vanessa had spent 2 years preparing for this very moment. For years, she'd cleaned every inch of the Whitmore estate floors, windows, silverware, always quiet, always invisible. But behind that silence was a mind sharp as glass, and behind her calm, a plan was forming. Vanessa had not always been a cleaning lady. She once studied law and economics, graduating with honors before life took a cruel turn. After her parents died in a wrongful foreclosure scandal involving Whitmore Industries, she gave up everything to fight for justice. But the doors of power were closed to her, so she chose a different path. She infiltrated from within. When she was hired by the Whitmores as a cleaning lady, no one asked for her credentials. They just saw a black woman with calloused hands and assumed ignorance. That assumption would cost them everything. Over those 2 years, Vanessa quietly gathered information. She listened. She watched. She documented the financial records Charles left lying around. She copied contracts, saved voicemails, and photographed signed deals stored carelessly in his office. What she discovered was far worse than what happened to her parents. Charles Whitmore wasn't just corrupt. He was criminal. Embezzlement, labor violations, racial discrimination in hiring, bribes to city officials. The paper trail was damning. But Vanessa wasn't looking for revenge. She was preparing for restoration. The gala that night was to celebrate Whitmore Industries' record profits earned through exploitation. Vanessa didn't just crash the party. She was the surprise guest of honor. When the laughter reached its peak, she stepped into the center of the ballroom and cleared her throat. The band stopped playing. The chatter silenced. "Good evening," she said, her voice poised and strong. "My name is Vanessa Brooks, and I'm not here as your cleaning lady tonight. I'm here as the rightful whistleblower of everything this empire has stolen." Charles froze. "What is this nonsense?" he snapped. Vanessa reached into her clutch and handed a thick folder to the journalist from the New York Times standing nearby. She'd invited the press herself. In this file, she said, you'll find evidence of over $40 million in diverted pension funds, illegal evictions of factory workers, and fraudulent tax returns. All signed by Mr. Whitmore himself. Gasps erupted. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. 2 years ago, she continued. My parents lost everything. Because of a deal. Charles. Whitmore made behind closed doors. I've been cleaning those very doors ever since. Learning, collecting, waiting. Tonight, I return that injustice. Not with revenge, but with truth. The room exploded in chaos. Charles's attorney rushed to him, whispering urgently. But it was too late. The documents had already been emailed to federal prosecutors, IRS, investigators, and the Department of Labor. Then came the final blow. Vanessa stepped aside as Congresswoman Elaine Mills, a surprise guest and longtime advocate for workers' rights, entered the room. I've seen the evidence, she said clearly, and I stand with Miss Brooks. Justice has a name tonight, and it's hers. Charles was arrested within 48 hours. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She refused financial compensation. Instead, she negotiated a court settlement to reclaim the properties stolen from dozens of workers and their families, starting with her parents' home. She also launched the Brooks Foundation for Economic Justice, seeded with $5 million recovered from Whitmore's frozen accounts. The foundation provided legal aid, financial literacy programs, and scholarships for underrepresented students. Within its first year, it helped 218 families recover lost wages and property titles. Vanessa was no longer invisible. She was invited to speak at Harvard Law, the United Nations, Economic Forum, and the National Civil Rights Conference. Yet she always returned to her roots, quietly walking through her old neighborhood, reminding kids that power didn't always wear suits. Sometimes, it wore work boots and rubber gloves. As for the Whitmore estate, it was transformed into a justice center bearing Vanessa's parents' names, the Clarence and Eloise Brooks Center for Restoration and Equity. A place that once celebrated corruption now educated others on how to fight it. Years later, when asked how she remained so composed in the face of mockery and hate, Vanessa simply said, "They thought I was just a cleaning lady. But I knew who I was long before they laughed at me." Her story wasn't just about justice. It was about the dignity of those the world tries to ignore. It was about standing in the very room meant to shame you, and choosing not to bow your plain head but to raise your voice. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins with a mop, a plan, and a woman who refuses to be underestimated. The sun had barely risen over the quiet town of Riverbrook when Amara Wilson stepped off to the coach, suitcase in hand, nerves tangled with hope. Dressed modestly in a blue cotton dress, she was everything polite society claimed to admire, educated, well-mannered, and resilient. But to Harold Pierce, the white merchant who had written to her for months, through a mail-order bride service, none of that mattered. He saw only one thing, her skin. "You didn't say you were black," he spat the moment she introduced herself. "I don't want trouble in this town. Go back to where you came from." The rejection was loud and public. Onlookers turned away, whispering behind gloved hands. Amara didn't cry. She didn't plead. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked away. Because Amara didn't come to beg for a place. She came to reclaim one. What Harold didn't know was that Amara wasn't just any woman. She was the great-granddaughter of Joseph Freeman, a formerly enslaved man who had acquired over 200.com acres of fertile land after the Civil War land that had mysteriously disappeared from public records. That land now made up half of Riverbrook's downtown. Amara had spent the last year uncovering her family's lost deeds and historical documents in Boston's archives. And her arrival wasn't just for marriage, it was for justice. But first, she needed a roof. She found it in Alexander Maxwell, a quiet, respected white farmer in his 40s. He had seen Harold's cruelty at the train station and had been moved by Amara's grace. "I've got space in my guest house," he said kindly, "and work, if you're willing." "I don't want charity," Amara replied. "And I don't offer it," he said with a small smile. So began their unlikely partnership. Amara took on the role of librarian and historical archivist for Alexander's estate. Over the weeks, he came to admire her keen intellect, her quiet strength, and the fire in her eyes when she spoke of justice. She, in turn, came to trust him, not because he protected her, but because he listened. Meanwhile, Riverbrook watched and whispered. The town's elite were scandalized. A black woman living under the roof of a respected white man. The judgment was swift and harsh, but Amara had endured far worse. As she organized documents in Alexander's estate library, she uncovered old ledgers, maps, receipts, and copies of land transfers that had once belonged to Joseph Freeman. Referencing them with public records, Amara began to assemble a timeline of theft. Names of town founders who had forged signatures, manipulated laws, and quietly absorbed Joseph's land into their estates. It was all their proof of systematic erasure. Armed with this evidence, Amara prepared a formal land reclamation petition. But instead of launching a legal battle, she requested an audience with the Riverbrook Town Council. On a rainy Thursday morning, she walked into the courthouse, not with anger, but with intention. "My name is Amara Wilson," she said to the room of stunned white faces, "and I am the direct descendant of Joseph Freeman. The land you stand on, your homes, your shops, your banks once belonged to my family." She laid out the documents on the council table. "I have no desire to take back what cannot be undone, but I do intend to restore what was stolen, not by eviction, but through legacy." Gasps filled the room. "I propose the creation of the Freeman Equity Foundation," she continued. "Funded by returned assets and community donations, it will offer scholarships, small business grants, and housing support for all marginalized residents of Riverbrook, black, brown, and poor white alike. It wasn't revenge, it was vision. Alexander stood in support beside her, placing $250,000 of his own money into the Prester Foundation. So did a few others, teachers, retired veterans, and quietly remorseful descendants of those who had once benefited from injustice. The council was stunned, but they couldn't deny the evidence. Amara's grace and logic left them without defense. Within months, the Freeman Equity Foundation was established. Amara served as its executive director. The town's culture began to shift. Where once there was silence, now there was acknowledgement. History that had been buried was now taught in schools. Businesses donated, volunteers stepped forward, and scholarships were awarded in Joseph Freeman's name. And as for Harold Pierce, his general store went out of business after a public boycott. He tried to smear Amara's name, but the town had already changed. His voice no longer mattered. Amara never sought to humiliate him. She never even mentioned his name again. A year later, Riverbrook held its first Unity Day, a community festival celebrating shared heritage. Amara gave the opening speech, and Alexander, now her partner, in more than just work, stood by her side. "True justice," Amara said to the crowd, "is not punishment, it's restoration. We cannot rewrite history, but we can choose what we do with its weight." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Black, white, young, old. "And we can choose to rise together." Thunderous applause followed. Tears flowed. And beneath the bright festival banners, Amara Wilson finally reclaimed what was always hers. Not just land, but respect, dignity, and a future Joseph Freeman dreamed of. It was supposed to be a quiet morning at the cemetery. Victoria Langston, a billionaire CEO known for her icy demeanor and corporate power, had come alone to visit the grave of her son Adrian, who had died in a car crash 2 years earlier. She brought white lilies, stood in silence, and then she saw them. A young black waitress, Jasmine Washington, was kneeling by the same grave, her arms wrapped protectively around a little boy, his eyes hauntingly familiar. "Who are you?" Victoria asked, voice sharp. Jasmine rose slowly, wiping tears from her cheek. "This is Tyler," she said softly. "Your grandson." Victoria's world spun. Jasmine wasn't lying. She had documentation, photos, even a letter Adrian had written before he died, entrusting Jasmine to raise Tyler with love and dignity. And she had done exactly that, without asking for a single dollar. But Jasmine hadn't come to beg. She came prepared. With support from lawyers, investigators, and her law professor aunt, she revealed not only Tyler's heritage, but the decades of corruption Victoria had buried in her empire. Within weeks, the truth brought everything crashing down. But what rose in its place was something better. Tyler's future, built on love, truth, and justice. Life lesson and call to action? Sometimes, true power isn't in wealth or status. It's in love, quiet courage, and preparation. Jasmine didn't seek revenge. She sought dignity. And in doing so, she gave her son the future he deserved. What would you do if someone tried to erase your truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss stories that restore hope and justice.